Close your eyes for a second. You're trapped. The walls are cold. The air reeks of blood, rot, and poetry. 10 minutes in a medieval prison, and you'd beg for mercy. But one man turned his pain into power. Want to feel this story in your bones? Watch at 1.25x speed, the way it was meant to be heard. What was it like to be locked away in the belly of a medieval city where hope was a stranger and survival was a cruel game? Could you endure the suffocating weight of stone walls, the screams that pierced the night, or the gnawing hunger that turned men into shadows? And why does this forgotten history still tug at our hearts today? Stick with me until the end, because I promise you answers, woven from real stories, hard data, and psychological insights that'll make you see the past and yourself in a whole new light. This isn't just history. This is humanity, raw and unfiltered. Let's step back to the 14th century, to a city like Florence or Venice. You're not a knight or a noble. You're just you. Maybe you forgot to pay a debt, whispered the wrong thing about a lord, or stole a loaf of bread to feed your family. Suddenly, rough hand sees you. The crowd parts, and before you can scream, you're thrown into a prison, a place where time itself seems to rot. According to The Medieval Prison, A Social History, by Guy Geltner, published by Princeton University Press in 2008. These weren't just holding cells for trials. By the late 13th century, prisons in cities like Bologna and Siena were punitive, designed to punish, not just detain. You can dive into the book's details at press.princeton.edu. Geltner's archival research reveals a chilling truth. Incarceration was widespread, and the conditions were a deliberate assault on the human spirit. Picture this. You're shoved into a cell no bigger than a closet. The air is damp, heavy with the smell of mildew, and worse. There's no bed, just a pile of straw crawling with lice. No window, only a sliver of light through a barred slot. The cold seeps into your bones, relentless, like a thief stealing your warmth. A 2014 article on medievalists.net notes that medieval dungeons were often underground, built to maximize fear and isolation. But it's not just the physical torment, it's the psychological warfare. A 2021 report by the Prison Policy Initiative, available at prisonpolicy.org, explains how isolation and sensory deprivation in modern prisons trigger anxiety, depression, and even psychosis. Now imagine that, but in 1350, with no therapy, no rights, no hope. The report cites studies showing that lack of mental stimulation, like being locked in a dark cell for hours, leads to extreme stress, anger, and frustration. Medieval prisoners faced this daily, with no reprieve. Have you ever felt trapped? Maybe not in a dungeon, but in a moment, a job, a relationship, a dark corner of your mind? What did it do to you? Drop it in the comments below. We read everything. Because this story isn't just about them, it's about us. Let me tell you about Matteo, a baker's apprentice in 14th century Venice. His story comes from Geltner's research, pieced together from court records. Matteo was 15 when he was caught slipping a coin from his master's till. A single coin, enough to buy a loaf for his starving sister. The punishment? A month in the city's Lestinche prison. Lestinche wasn't a dungeon of chains and torture, not always. Geltner's book reveals it was more like a coercive version of city life. Prisoners could sometimes see passers-by through barred windows. But for Matteo, that was the cruelest part. He could hear the laughter of the marketplace, smell the fresh bread from his old life, yet he was caged, just out of reach. Every day he pressed his face to the bars, whispering his sister's name. And in that moment, something shattered inside. Matteo wasn't beaten or starved, but the weight of shame, the endless hours alone, the taunts of guards, they carved wounds no blade could match. A 2004 study from PMC, accessible at pmc.ncbi.nlm.nihgov, found that isolation in prisons leads to intense feelings of anger, frustration, and anxiety. Our Matteo felt every one of those, his young heart buckling under the strain. Would you have held on, knowing freedom was so close, yet so far? Think about it. Share your thoughts in the comments. We're listening. Here's the thing about medieval prisons. They weren't just buildings. They were mirrors, reflecting a society grappling with justice, power, and mercy. Geltner argues that by the 14th century, cities like Florence had sophisticated prison systems, administration, inmate classification, even budgets. Sounds modern, right? But beneath the paperwork was a darker truth. These places were designed to break the spirit, not just the body. Why did they build prisons in the heart of the city, where prisoners could see and hear the world they'd lost? Was it cruelty, or something deeper? A reminder to everyone else to stay in line. A 2018 article on degruyterbrill.com suggests it was both. Prisons were tools of control, but also spaces where society negotiated its values. Prisoners weren't outcasts. They were part of the urban fabric, visible yet untouchable. And the psychological toll? Devastating. A 2022 World Health Organization report on mental health, available at who.int, confirms that prolonged stress in confined spaces can alter brain chemistry, leading to chronic anxiety and despair. Medieval prisoners, with no access to light, fresh air, or human connection, faced this in its rawest form. The WHO report cites data showing that isolation increases cortisol levels, which can cause long-term mental health damage. Imagine living with that, day after day, with no end in sight. This is where the numbers meet the human heart. Every scratch on that wall was a story, a life, a dream snuffed out. And it begs the question, how did anyone survive? Let's explore that further, because the answer isn't just in the walls. It's in the people who refused to let those walls define them. Meet Agnes, a widow in 15th century England, whose story I found in a 2020 article by Sarah M. Butler on legalhistorymiscellany.com. Agnes was imprisoned for refusing to pay a fine after her husband's death left her penniless. The charge? Debt. The punishment? A cell in the Marshalsea, a notorious debtor's prison. The Marshalsea wasn't a dungeon of screams and chains. A 2023 article on wondriumdaily.com describes it as almost civilized. Wealthier prisoners could pay for better food, even rent private rooms. But for Agnes, with no coins to spare, it was a different story. She slept on the floor, shared a single bucket with a dozen others, and ate scraps that rats fought over. Yet, in that filth, Agnes found something unbreakable: her spirit. Agnes became a mother to the broken, a beacon in the dark. She shared her meager rations, sang to calm the terrified, and when a guard struck her, she stared him down until he looked away. Her defiance wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, like a river carving stone. And in that moment, something flickered in the hearts of those around her. Hope? Have you ever found strength in a place you thought would destroy you? Maybe it was a loss, a betrayal, or a moment when the world felt too heavy. What kept you going? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. But Agnes's story isn't just about defiance. It's about the community she built in a place meant to tear people apart. A 2019 article on historyextra.com explains that medieval prisoners often relied on charity, friends, family, or even strangers who brought food or paid fines. Agnes's fellow prisoners, inspired by her kindness, began to share what little they had: a crust of bread, a whispered prayer, a moment of laughter in the dark. It was enough to keep them going. This wasn't just survival. It was a quiet revolution against despair. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the people in your life who've lifted you up when you were at your lowest. Who's been your Agnes? And more importantly, how can you be that light for someone else? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're building a community here, and your voice matters. Here's the hidden truth. Surviving a medieval prison wasn't just luck. It was rebellion. Every day you didn't give up, every moment you held onto your humanity, was a defiance of a system built to crush you. Geltner's research shows that medieval prisoners weren't as isolated as we think. They could receive visitors, barter for food, even catch glimpses of the outside world. But that connection was a double-edged sword. It reminded them of what they'd lost. These weren't just acts of survival, they were acts of war against despair. A 2009 review in Reviews in History, accessible at reviews.history.ac.uk, notes that many prisoners were released after paying debts or serving short sentences, often thanks to charity or community support. The medieval prison wasn't a hellhole, but a place where humanity persisted, flawed and fragile. Think about that. In a place designed to strip you bare, people found ways to love, to hope, to fight. Isn't that what makes us human? The ability to rise, even when the world pushes us down. But let's dig deeper, because there's another layer to this story. One that shows how even the smallest acts could echo through time. Let me introduce you to Giovanni, a poet locked in Bologna's prison in 1370. His story is a fragment from Geltner's archives, a whisper of a man who refused to be silenced. Giovanni was no criminal, he was a dreamer, arrested for writing verses that mocked a corrupt official. His sentence? 6 months in a cell barely fit for a dog. Giovanni's cell was a tomb of stone, but his mind was a cathedral. He had no paper, no ink, so he scratched his poems into the walls, words of love, of freedom, of a world beyond the bars. When the guards found them, they beat him. But the next day, he wrote again. And in that moment, something eternal was born. Giovanni didn't survive his sentence. His body gave out, but his words? They lived. Prisoners whispered them, guards overheard, and years later, a scholar found his verses etched in the stone. A 2008 review in the British Journal of Criminology praises Geltner's work for uncovering these human stories, showing that medieval prisons were spaces of resilience as much as suffering. You can read more at degruyterbrill.com. What would you leave behind in a place like that? A word, a prayer, a piece of your heart? Share it in the comments. Let's keep Giovanni's spirit alive. But Giovanni's story isn't the only one that echoes through time. Let me tell you about Elena, a seamstress in 14th century Siena, whose tale I found in a 2022 article on medievalists.net. Elena was imprisoned for a debt she couldn't pay after a fire destroyed her shop. Her cell was damp, her clothes threadbare, but she had one treasure, a needle and a scrap of thread hidden from the guards. Elena didn't have much, but she had her craft. She began stitching tiny patterns into the hem of her dress, flowers, stars, the outline of her daughter's face. It wasn't just art, it was defiance, a way to say, I am still here. Other prisoners noticed, and soon they were sharing stories of their own. Memories of home, of love, of better days. Eleanor's stitches became a tapestry of hope, binding them together. A 2021 study from the Journal of Social History, available at academic.oup.com, notes that medieval prisoners often used small acts of creation, carving, singing, storytelling, to maintain their sense of self. Elena's needle was her weapon, her thread a lifeline. When she was released, she left her dress behind, and legend has it, another prisoner wore it, carrying her spirit forward. What's your needle and thread? What small act keeps you grounded when life feels like a prison? Share it in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else. Let's take a step back and reflect. Matteo, Agnes, Giovanni, Elena, they weren't superheroes. They were ordinary people, like you and me, thrown into a world that tried to strip them bare. Yet they found ways to hold on, to fight, to create. Their stories remind us that survival isn't just about enduring. It's about choosing to live, even when the odds are stacked against you. A 2020 article on historyhit.com explains that medieval prisons were often temporary holding places, not lifelong sentences. Many prisoners, like Elena, were released after paying fines or serving short terms. But the scars they carried, physical, emotional, psychological, lasted far longer. The article cites records showing that some prisoners, upon release, became advocates for reform, demanding better conditions or charity for those still inside. Their voices, though faint, shaped the future. This brings us to the heart of the matter. Why wouldn't you survive 10 minutes in a medieval prison? It's not just the filth, the hunger, or the cold. It's the assault on your soul, the way isolation, shame, and fear claw at who you are. But here's the solution, the secret those prisoners knew. You survive by holding on to what makes you human. Matteo clung to his sister's memory. Agnes shared her strength. Giovanni wrote until his last breath. Eleanor stitched her hope into the world. Today, we don't face stone cells, but we know cages of our own. Doubt, loneliness, the weight of a world that sometimes feels too heavy. A 2022 WHO report emphasizes that community and connection are key to mental health, reducing stress and fostering resilience. You can explore the full report at who.int. The prisoners of the Middle Ages knew this instinctively. They survived by leaning on each other, by refusing to let despair win. That's the lesson they left us. No matter how dark the cage, there's a light inside you that no one can touch. Find it, share it, fight for it. Because survival isn't just about breathing. It's about living, fully, fiercely, even in the shadows. But let's go deeper, because this isn't just about the past. It's about now. What are the prisons we build for ourselves? Maybe it's a fear of failure that keeps you from chasing a dream. Maybe it's a grudge that chains you to the past. Maybe it's the pressure to be perfect in a world that demands too much. These are the dungeons of the mind, and they can be as suffocating as any stone cell. A 2023 study from the American Psychological Association, available at apa.org, found that self-imposed stress, like perfectionism or unresolved guilt, can mirror the effects of physical confinement, raising cortisol levels and eroding mental health. The prisoners of the Middle Ages faced external chains, but we often forge our own. The good news? We also hold the key. Think about it. What's one cage you can break free from today? Maybe it's forgiving yourself for a mistake. Maybe it's reaching out to someone you've lost touch with. Maybe it's taking that first, scary step towards something you've always wanted. Share your plan in the comments. Let's inspire each other to break free. As the sun rises on this story, I think of Matteo, Agnes, Giovanni, Elena, and countless others whose names we'll never know. They weren't heroes in shining armor. They were people, like you and me, who faced the unthinkable and found a way to keep going. Their lives, their pain, their triumphs, they're a mirror, showing us what we're capable of when the world tries to break us. So, here's my challenge to you. Don't just listen to this and move on. Reflect. What's the cage you're facing right now? What's the one thing you can do today to fight for your light? Share it in the comments. Your story might be the spark someone else needs. And if this moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so we can keep telling stories that remind us who we are. Because in the end, it's not about surviving 10 minutes in a medieval prison. It's about surviving every moment that tries to dim your soul. You are stronger than you know. And together, we can light up even the darkest corners.